Want to find out a huge tip for installing faux shiplap? Find out what it is, coming up next. What's going on, guys? Kendall here for Renos for Pros and Joes, helping you simplify the renovation and remodeling process. On this channel, we do hands-on product tool and gear reviews, as well as renovation tip and strategy videos like this one. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing. Today, I am on site at a renovation project, and one of the components of this project is shiplap, or faux shiplap. And one of the things that I have often seen online on blogs and Pinterest and on YouTube videos deals with prepping the boards for installation. Everything from how to get them cut down to sanding them to installation. And there's two things that I want to touch on today because I have an easier way to do this from a standpoint of time savings as well as the overall look of your finished project. Okay, so it is going to require more from you as an individual from a skill level standpoint, but ultimately your end result is going to be much better. So one of the things that I see commonly is that folks take their boards, or not take their boards, but when they're purchasing their boards from the hardware store, they have the people at the hardware store cut the panels down for them into the size that they desire to install on the walls, okay? And then they take the boards home, and then they use an electric sander, and then they sand the edges down to get everything smooth the way that they want it, and then they install them, okay? So what I propose that you should do, and what I've done on this project is, I've cut my own panels down using a table saw, and then I've trimmed all my panels using a miter saw. And the big thing with this is you want to make sure that you have the ideal blade for cutting. That's one of the biggest differences between cutting the boards yourself versus having them cut in the hardware store. Because if you think about it, in a hardware store, they have one general blade on that tool. And it's a very large machine, and they're just, you know, bringing the machine down or sliding the machine over, and it's just cutting. It's cutting, it's cutting, and it's just ripping through the wood. And they're cutting everything on that saw. A lot of times they may be cutting up 2x4s and 2x8s, 2x10s, pressure-treated lumber, pine, oak, you know, whatever they sell in the store, they will run through that saw to cut with, okay? And so the point that I'm making is, number one, that saw is not going to be calibrated as well as you probably would want it to be for you to be able to make precision cuts for something like this, where you're going to be very, very visually sensitive to imperfections in the width and sizing of your boards. So that's number one. So calibration of the saw is going to be the first thing. So if you're cutting on your own setup, then you have more control over that. Number two is the blade. If they have a blade that is going to be designed to cut, you know, general lumber, that blade is not going to be as delicate and make as smooth of a cut as you would want it to be installing something that's going to be very visible on your walls. And a lot of times when you see the cuts that it makes, it leaves, you know, little burrs and splinters and everything else like that. And that's the main reason why you have to come back and sand it down so that it looks decent, okay? And so on the project that I'm standing on, I cut down all of the panels myself, and then I also sized everything myself for installation. So that would be using a table saw to rip the boards down lengthwise of the 8-foot sheets, and then using a miter saw to cut lengths that I needed widthwise. So let me just quickly show you what this looks like so that you can have a point of reference so that we're on the same page. So in this space, I can show you, this is one wall here that we did, and then we did this section here at the top, and then we've also done a section down here. And so if you look closely here at these boards, look closely at the gaps as well as the edges of the boards, because what I want you to notice is that there's no burrs or splinters along the edges. Sorry, I missed that one. Burrs or splinters along the edges of these boards, okay? And the main thing about that is I didn't sand any of these boards. These were just cut on the saw and then leveled and installed, okay? By using my own setup, I was able to completely skip the step of sanding, which probably will take you several hours easily, and that's probably if you're working with someone else. So we were able to do that. So the main thing and the big tip is that number one, you should either purchase or rent your own saws to rip your boards down, or have someone do that for you. That's another option that probably may work out very well for you. But the other piece of it is, regardless of whether or not you purchase the saw or rent the saw, having them cut off site is going to give you a much better and much more uniform look to your overall project. And the big thing, or the big difference that we're basically focusing in on, is going to be the blade. So on this particular project, I have a table saw and I have a miter saw, and I have the same size blade on each saw. So I'm using a blade that is specifically designed for cutting paneling. I'll have the link to that below in the description, but I also wanted to show you specifically, I've got some of our leftover pieces here. And so I just wanted to show you that I picked some of these up, and some of these are rejects that we didn't use. So this one's actually, see, this got a little chip on the end. That's not even from cutting, because this is an 8-foot piece. So this is a chip that came from the store. But if we're looking at this board, you can see here before it's been installed, you can see that it's got, blade marks on it on one side. But if you look here, you can see that it's very smooth. So these have all been passed through the saw, because when I cut these, each board is going to give me about 6 sheets or 6 8-foot runs out of each board, because I cut each one of these is 7.5. So if I pick up any one of these, I'm knocking stuff down here, but if I pick this up and just pick up another board, you can see the edges here. These are cut edges, because you can see kind of the browning places from the blade, but they're smooth and we didn't sand a thing. So most of these boards are going to be cut on both sides, and it's difficult to see here, but also the other issue that you run into with cutting on a saw in the store goes back to the calibration again. When I mean calibration, what I'm referring to is the precision of the cut, and making sure that when that board runs through there, that the blade is lined up in such a way that the end result is that your piece is the same height profile on both ends. Otherwise, when you go to put the board up there and you go to level it up, you may have it level on the wall, but if the board profile is 7 inches on one end and it's 7.25 inches on this end, then it's still gonna be off slightly when you're starting to line it up with the board above and below it. And so that's why a lot of this is so crucial. So you wanna make sure that when you're doing this, that you give yourself the best opportunity to make this happen. So even if you're not comfortable with running power tools and things like this, because there's obviously inherent danger with running any type of saw, particularly these type of saws, because you got a spinning blade at a high rate of speed and it's very, very sharp. So if you don't feel comfortable with that, that is completely understandable, and you may want to just spend the few extra dollars and hire someone to just cut all your boards down for you, even if it's on site for you, just so you could have everything prepared up. And you can provide the blade for them so that they, make them exactly the way that you want them. That way that when you actually start to do your installations, that you have everything the way that you want it, and you don't have to compromise as much with the way that your finished product looks. It's already a time-consuming thing to come in here and do this type of project, even if you're doing it as a DIY. And it's a shame to go through all that and then have it kind of just look okay. And so I'm just kind of showing you some things that I have figured out just in doing this, to show you some easy ways to improve the way that your finished project looks. And there's no other time for me to show it to you that's better than now, because we don't have any painting on the wall, we don't have any spackling, and so you can see any imperfections and problems in here before we do anything else to start making everything look more uniform. So that's one of the best tips that I have for you for installing Shiplap, is to use the correct blade and cut your wood down on site. And let me show you something else that you can also do. One of the other problems that you run into is going to be if your walls are not level and even. If your walls are not even, or your ceilings are not even, then you're ultimately going to have pieces either at the top or bottom that are not going to be exactly the same height on both sides. And so if you've got everything cut down and you don't have a way to cut on site, how are you gonna cut those pieces on your job site or in your home, okay? This is a question that you've got to answer for yourself. Now, if you may be able to go back up to the store and have them try to rip it down or try to like make sure that you take very good measurements in order to make that happen. But in some situations, you're gonna have, you know, multiple precision cuts that are gonna require fine cuts where you may be making minor modifications to make sure that that piece fits in there tight. And so for that purpose, having the saws on site is still gonna be a better option for you. And let me just show you exactly what I'm talking about. So sometimes you're gonna have cuts like this board here at the bottom here, that board right there is not the same height on each side. One side is taller than on the other side. If I look over here at the top of this doorway here, this piece right here is more narrow on this end than it is on this end. Let me see if I can show you some other ones. Any of these boards here, because for this installation I installed from the top down, and so when we get to the bottom, we have the piece that has to be trimmed. So if you look down here at the bottom, you can see that this last row here is less than half the height of the other boards. Not only is it half the height, but it's also not level. So it's still about a ½ inch off on one side versus the other side. So it has to be ripped at an angle in order to make it give a smooth cut there. And on this particular job, we were able to leave the baseboards in place because they had a very thick profile, allowing the faux shiplap to sit right on top of it, makes a seamless transition, and it doesn't look weird or wonky or anything like that once it's installed, as you can see here. So that's what I wanted to share with you guys today on this video. Hopefully you found this informative. As I said, don't forget to look in the description box for links to that specific blade that I use on this project. Any blade that has the same number of teeth profile will get the job done, but I just wanted to at least share this information with you. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you guys on the next one.